Hi everyone, thank you so much for making the time to join us today on our LinkedIn Live. We're very, very pleased to have our special guest, Matthew Harmsworth, with us, who works at Cavendish as a principal town planner and social value consultant, but he's here mainly to talk to us today about his role as a member of Neurodiversity in Planning and one of the current leaders. So thank you so much for making the time today to speak with us, really appreciate it. So I guess let's go straight into it. Could you talk to us a bit about neurodiversity in planning? How did it begin? How did you meet the people that founded it? We'd love to hear more about the organisation.
Yeah, sure. So it was originally founded during early 2020, I think it was. The original 4 co-founders met during that period through mutual connections. So people like Sue Mans, who was heavily involved in the first webinar that the network put on in collaboration with the RTPI. At the time, I think she was the president of the RTPI, certainly has been previously. So through connections in the town planning world like that, and mutual interests in things like ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, those kind of things, they got connected and put together, and they saw there was a gap there. Keely Mitchell in particular had mooted the idea, there should be a network about this sort of thing. It feels like there aren't enough people talking about it in the planning world. And so they got together, collaborated, okay, let's form a network. Let's each take 25% of the leadership of the network and make it happen. So come October 2020, they had the first launch webinar, which was essentially about what is neurodiversity, why is it important, and what are we going to do about it. I got involved at a slightly later point. So I presented at the National Young Planners Conference in 2022 alongside Keely Mitchell, along the lines of the subject of planning for all. So all about access and neurodiversity and disability. So we presented that together. We got talking about neurodiversity in general and the network. I mentioned I had a mutual interest in that, and I just said I'd like to be involved. I got involved in the leadership of the network, and here I am ever since.
And Matthew, why does neurodiversity matter to organisations as such of what we work in, but also generally across the board? Why is the cause so important to you, and why do you think it's important that awareness is brought to the topic?
Yeah, so the statistics are generally here are about 15 to 20% of people globally are neurodiverse, fit into that category. They're formally diagnosed or not. Fundamentally, it's about how the brain functions differently, differently from what is seen as a typical sort of way of the brain functioning. So dementia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all sorts of different things that it can cover. And it doesn't necessarily need a formal diagnosis. As I say, it's just if you see a need there, if somebody functions a little bit differently, then we can have a conversation. And it's important that those people feel valued. And I think that's what it comes down to. It comes down to happiness. It comes down to people feeling valued. And nothing for me gives me more job satisfaction than helping people realise their potential. It's a growing issue. We hear about all the time about the increased, from a cost perspective, of people's mental health issues from the NHS all the time, having more and more people come to a realisation that they do need a little bit more help. So it's something that's good and important to talk about, I think. Mm-hmm. And in terms of from a town planning and sustainability point of view, it really brings that social aspect of sustainable development to the fore. And it brings that community heart aspect to it, to say that we are looking at local needs. We do realise that people are different. And so we should plan for a flexibility and a variety of people's needs. From my educational background, which I might come on to in a little bit, I particularly like the interest and value that talking about the subject gives to things like joint strategic needs analysis, which the NHS produce. So in talking about it and making use of all that research and collaborating, we can better address, how are we going to use this bit of landscaping to address complex needs? Mm-hmm. How are we going to help people form a bond and feel relaxed in this particular place. And from a localism perspective as well, you look at neighbourhood plans and what's important to people. You look at beyond the town planning policy side of it, the local research and preferences that are being done. There's often a lot of issues of loneliness and people feeling disconnected as issues cited within particular areas. I think the more we talk about these kind of things and the more inclusive we try to make our societies, then the less loneliness there will be and the more people there will be that are actually happy. You look at the guidance documents that are increasingly being used for things like autistic spectrum disorder supported living units. So PAS 6463, a guidance document on neurodiversity and building for the mind. That brings some really useful and important lessons to the fore when that's used as part of planning and development for flexibility, just making simple adjustments like using a push panel rather than a door handle to make a place more accessible. The familiarity of places, the material finishes, the way that they impact our visual and sensory experiences. The more informed that we can be at the end of the day, as both as public and professionals, the more we can realise, oh, actually there is some great design going on here, and we can recognise not just that, okay, that's a nice to have, but we can really see the deep intrinsic value of it as well.
Mm-hmm. So Cavendish have been lucky enough to work with neurodiversity and planning to support them on their toolkit, which still, remains one of the things that we've had most downloaded on our website. And if you want to check that out, we'll drop a link to that in the comment box. But more recently, we were really pleased to launch your website and your new LinkedIn page. What are some of your ambitions for how you use the new website and how you use that new, revised and refreshed identity under the new LinkedIn page to suit the future ambitions of the group?
I've touched on it already to a large degree, but I think it is, so much of it is about, that I can't stress it enough, about that collaborative aspect of it, and that it's not just town planners that we're engaging with as well. Being in town planning and being, I've been local authority side, I've been developer side, I've been consultancy side now. And having all those three different aspects, you can see all the different disciplines that are involved, that we do engage those other disciplines as well and have that as a collaborative discussion. I think I would like to increasingly see it as a national input, where there's the 4 or 5 of us which lead the network already. We are quite spread out, and I would like to see a lot more coverage, a lot more people involved personally, producing all sorts of different content. And I think going along with the theme and needs of neurodiversity in general, I think having a variety of content, so not just the blogs, but also the podcasts, the webinars, the audio recordings, lots of different types of things, the toolkits, the visuals, the case studies. It's really important that we have a variety of content as well, because all of those different professionals and people and members of the public will be able to bring a lot of different skills and a lot of different attributes to the content that the website produces and features, and that the LinkedIn page features. And so moving forward, that'll make it more accessible to more people, the more variety that we can give.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there about, the individual skills each person can give in various different roles. I think it'd probably be worth us now touching on your role that you do at Arcadis now, and how that feeds into and complements the work that you've done with neurodiversity and planning. Yeah,
so I think I've got a unique route into town planning. So I'll summarise very briefly. I think it's worth us starting there. So I barely knew what town planning was, to be honest, when I was growing up. I did my bachelor's in psychology. I did my first postgraduate in audiology. I got my first job in project management, and then it was the project management that led me into town planning. And so that kind of diversity, incidentally and kind of it's partly how I structured my career as well, and having that vision to kind of integrate all of them has fed into how my career has developed in general. So obviously the psychology aspect of it was really useful in getting that sort of mental health, mental awareness side of things. Audiology from the physical health and accessibility point of view, and then the project management and town planning, and then the social value aspect, which has been brought in since, you know, I joined Arcadis and been formalised as part of my role. All of those kind of things, and how broad town planning and social value are as subjects, really filter through to have quite a comprehensive approach to this discussion that we're having about neurodiversity, and that we want to continue to have. So, for example, as part of my psychology degree, I did my research project on font disfluency. What I can bring to it personally is that broad health discussion. I can bring perspectives from a local authority, a client side point of view, and from a consultancy side point of view. I'm not somebody who has a formal diagnosis myself or anything, but I'm naturally a very introverted person, even on a physiological level. I don't necessarily come across like it all the time, but it doesn't mean that there aren't things going on inside, and the amount of energy that it uses in a lot of social situations because of that way I work. There's hidden things that I have to deal with, which don't necessarily come under any sort of formal diagnosis. That's just one example. And for me, it really helps me identify with people who have other neurodiversity issues, or even people who have different disabilities. As part of my audiology course, we had a guest visitor who had tunnel vision. And so we each got to try on a pair of glasses that simulated tunnel vision, sort of with the rest of the glasses blacked out with just a little pinprick hole in the front of it. And you can just, hopefully you can just imagine and picture it if you sort of imagine that you've got blinkers on like that. How draining of energy that is for you, because we're not in a world that's designed for people who have tunnel vision. You know, it's completely not suitable for driving a car and getting around, and a lot of the streets that we have can be quite dangerous for people who have sensory impairments like that. And the same goes for neurodiversity in the mind. A lot of the time, too often, there have been developments in the past which have not been designed for the mind and for neurodiversity, or, you know, especially perhaps, you know, autistic spectrum disorder. And so I think the more that we can bring that conversation to the fore, and the more people there are involved in different parts of town planning, the better quality of built environment we can design. Is where I'm coming from.
And Matthew, like, in terms of what it is I'm hearing say, you know, accessibility and awareness is huge to this topic. And I guess in your experience, how do you think that businesses can improve this accessibility, this awareness of having the conversation, of even beginning to have the conversation about how do we make this environment, you know, accessible for people with neurodiverse needs?
Yeah, I think one of the great things which a lot of organisations do, to start on the positive, is so we in Arcadis call them communities of practice and affinity groups. So our communities of practice are designed around improving the different service areas of the business. So we have a town planning specific one. And then we also have affinity groups. So there's a access and neurodiversity affinity group within Arcadis. There's also the faith groups, there's the orientation, there's the gender, there's the age, different groups, about all those different protected characteristics. So I think it's really important that those groups happen, and that people feel as though their voices are listened to, that there's that safe base and group of people who have a common interest that they can talk about openly, who are very likely to understand the issues that they are going through, the challenges they face in doing their job as effectively as they feel as they can. I think taking a step further, I think a lot of the time those messages across a lot of organisations are kept within those particular groups and don't necessarily extend to other people across the practice. They might get, or they might go out there but get lost in a social media LinkedIn feed, or they might just, we have so many emails coming in. It's so easy for those messages and outputs from those groups to get lost as sort of, the non-essential stuff, if you like. But that it is, incredibly important nonetheless. So I think the more we get people to realise that it is an important issue, when you get that email in from the results from this particular group, the more people will hopefully pay attention to it.
Sure. And I guess then on a wider level, so you mentioned there the idea of taking this conversation outside of the specific interest group, and so that the learnings and ideas are shared on a wider level. How do you think, if everything that ever existed on the Neurodiversity and Planning platform, through all the content you put together, through the website, through things like this podcast, if all of those messages were heard, what would the ultimate success of the Neurodiversity Network look like to you, in terms of its impacts on sort of outputs of various organisations, buildings, ways of working, etc.? Yeah,
fundamentally, I think the core is perhaps the most difficult to measure thing in some ways, but generally people feeling more valued and people feeling happier generally, not just town planners, a particular focus and responsibility towards town planners, but also people being happier with their built environment too, and realising how good it is. A lot of the time you think about, that kind of attitude can transform, say, an edible walkway, that has fragrant fruit trees and plants along there that people can enjoy when they are walking across, a public right of way somewhere. That turns it from simply being something that, oh, this is nice to have, when it's in season I can get a few berries from here or something, that some of the plants smell quite nice, into something that's a lot more than that, and realising, oh, this is really important that this is here because, engaging my sense of smell, engaging my sense of taste, that's the easiest way to build up association and memory of place. And so when as people age, as they get older, and things like dementia or memory loss related diseases and mental health conditions become more of an issue, that they've built up that association with the place that they live in. So there's that increased familiarity and it helps them to get around. Things like that, realising the real value of places. I think having it as a big joint collaborative effort, that we are regularly getting input from people outside the town planning profession, within design related subjects especially, so that quality can continually increase. It is an ever increasing subject in terms of the research that's being done, the intelligence and knowledge that there is around it, how much the public value it, especially since COVID, I would argue.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. I think, great to be able to begin to understand more and have that conversation around something that matters to so many people, and even matters to those that we may not even be aware of within our team. So I think there's so much for us to learn and glean from our conversation, and much to take forward into the coming months and years on how we improve accessibility and increase awareness for such an important topic.
Yes, some really important lessons learned from today for sure, and as Johnny said, a lot to take forward and a lot to reflect on. And for those of you that want to continue doing this outside of this podcast, we've put a link in the comments box to the Neurodiversity and Planning LinkedIn page. Please do follow that. Please do connect with them on there. Take a look at the new website that we launched just a few months ago now. We're still really excited to get more content up on there. And of course, please feel free to message us if you're interested in being involved in creating content or engaging further with the platform, or of course any of its members. Thank you so much for your time today.